getting organized is critical. You've got to get your current rent roll in place. You've got to get all of your leases, any amendments, get all of that stuff prepared. You probably had a survey or an environmental phase 1, phase 2, possibly on the property when you purchased it. Get all those documents gathered. Let's get all of this up front so that when a buyer comes to the table, you can quickly and easily give that information to them.
Welcome to the How to Scale Commercial Real Estate Show. Whether you are an active or passive investor, we'll teach you how to scale your real estate investing business into something big.
Jaimee Keene is a licensed commercial real estate broker. She specializes in office and industrial in the Denver markets. She also has spent 18 years as a commercial appraiser and holds the MIA designation from the Appraisal Institute. Jaimee, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sam. Appreciate it.
Hey, the pleasure's mine. It'd be a blast to jump on the call today and really talk about what's going on in the office and industrial spaces there in your market in Denver. Looking forward to that. There are 3 questions, however, I ask every guest who comes on the show. Can you very quickly tell us, where did you start, where are you now, and how did you get there?
Yeah, so I started actually in commercial banking over 20 years ago. Really quickly understood and realized that banking was not for me. And so I quickly jumped out of that and into commercial real estate appraising. So really got my real estate career launched as an appraiser. And then about almost 4 years ago, decided that brokerage would be a really good fit for me, and leveraged my appraisal background and banking background and stepped over into the brokerage side and focused on office and industrial assets.
Wow, that's fantastic. And how? And maybe you said this, and I just wasn't listening closely enough. How long was the time that you were an appraiser and then decided to become a broker?
Yeah, so was an appraiser for 18 years before I got my broker's license,
Okay.
And still maintained both. So I had my broker's and appraiser licenses at the same time, but learned really quickly that I wanted to just focus on the brokerage side. So really let that appraisal business slip away.
Right. Talk to us real quick before. I mean, there's a theme to this show, but how has the appraisal business changed in the last 18 years?
Yeah, really big difference from when I started. So originally it was a relationship-based business. I was able to work directly with real estate attorneys, with lenders, work on valuation projects and appraisal projects directly with those clients. With Dodd-Frank, everything shifted and there was a new wall put in place. So they didn't want undue influence from the lenders on the appraisers and really tried to remove a lot of that. So we had these third-party management companies come into the field, and really it became who could do it the fastest and the cheapest. So it didn't matter how many years of experience you had if you weren't the lowest bidder, and if your experience basically went out the window. And it was a shame, and that's really was a trigger for me to get out. Fees were getting pretty beat up, and your experience no longer mattered. The quality of what you were producing really just didn't matter anymore if you couldn't be cheap and fast. So it just changed.
How does a seller or a buyer protect themselves with that kind of changing environment? Like, it seems like if it's the lowest, fastest, cheapest price, fastest bidder on the project, then quality seems to go out the window typically in that environment. So how do we on the buy or sell side protect ourselves?
I say beware of fastest and cheapest, because I think those of us who've been in the industry a long time, we know our worth, and so we'll bid accordingly. And we might be able to meet the turn time requirement, but the fee might be a little higher. And if you value somebody who really knows what they're doing, you got to be willing to pay for it. There's an old adage: you get what you pay for. So just be careful.
Right. Yeah, that's fantastic. All right. So Jaimee, let's just transition then, if we can, and talk about office and industrial properties. One of the things that you focus on is preparing for sale. Can we talk a little bit about that and tell us kind of what things you see sellers should be thinking about right now?
Yeah, so I would say, really there's some things that you need to consider before you list your property. Obviously, you got to do a little bit of homework. I think the number one thing is assembling your A team, understanding you've got a property accountant, maybe you do your own property accounting, whatever it might be, but bring your accountant on board, because we're going to need them, and the buyer will be asking a lot of questions about the property accounting. Make sure that's all cleaned up. So get your property accountant on board, get your real estate attorney on board. They're going to be critical in this as well as we go through agreements. If a buyer presents contract that's not in a state mandated form or any form that you're not familiar with, you'll need your real estate attorney on board to review that and look for any pitfalls on your behalf. Another, I think often overlooked is actually start talking to lenders, even though you might be the seller, understanding what challenges might arise for financing your property. Because if there are issues underlying that a potential buyer might have with their lender, you want to understand that going in. And then are you prepared to offer any seller financing? If you don't have any loans on the property, you own it outright, but you're willing to carry a note for a potential buyer, understand what current market rates look like and how you might be able to structure something for a buyer coming in. Having a competent real estate broker on your side, on your A team is critical as well, because they're going to help you with the competitive market analysis and understanding the position of your property within the market. You want to know the lease rates, the current comps, and what current properties are listed for. If you're going to be competing against those properties for buyers, you want to make sure you're priced appropriately for that. So really assembling your A team, I think, is number one. The next step is really getting organized. Again, I talked about your property accountant, but getting organized is critical. You've got to get your rent roll, current rent roll in place. You've got to get all of your leases, any amendments, get all of that stuff prepared. You probably had a survey or an environmental phase 1, phase 2, possibly on the property when you purchased it. Get all those documents gathered. Let's get all of this up front, so that when a buyer comes to the table, you can quickly and easily give that information to them. If you have any building plans in your files, let's dig those out. So anything that you have on the property that a potential buyer will ask for, just get organized, have that stuff available and ready so that you can move quickly when buyers start asking these questions. And it's a real pain, right? When buyers start asking for this stuff, if you're not organized, you're going to be running around, and it's just do the homework up front and make your life a little easier, so that when you're in the transaction, you've already got this all teed up and ready to go. I think the third thing is working with your title officer, or maybe your broker has a relationship with some title companies, but run a preliminary title search. If you go under contract, you don't want anything surprising to pop up that might interfere with the sale of your building. So getting that preliminary title work in place. Maybe there's some liens on your property that you may know about. Maybe there's some hidden stuff that's there that you don't know about, but let's get that out of the way and be prepared to address it. If you do need to get any liens released, that requires some time. So let's go ahead and start clearing those out. Anything that's impacting title, just good to know up front. Probably the third thing is really getting your building or your asset ready for sale too. So, I always encourage my sellers, maybe we don't need a full blown building inspection like a buyer might do, but let's identify the things that would come up for an inspector. How's your HVAC system? How's your roof? Is there issues with siding or gutters or parking lot? Any of those maintenance items that have been overlooked over the years. Maybe you've had a property for 10 or 15 years and you've let a few things slide. Let's address those. If you need any bids for anything, maybe you don't want to get the work done right away, but let's be prepared for what a buyer is going to go out and start lifting the hood and say, well, hey, wait a minute, it's going to cost me $20,000 to repair this parking lot, and this roof is a little old. We might need to, budget for a new roof in the coming years. Let's understand those costs again going into it, so that when you're negotiating with a buyer, you're prepared for these things. And there may be things that you're just not aware of. So if you do want to have a property inspector come in and look over everything, just to bring you up to speed with the condition of your property, particularly if you're an out-of-state owner, if you've got a building in another market that you maybe don't see on a day-to-day basis, and maybe your property manager isn't, kind of giving you all the feedback that you need. Let's go ahead and evaluate those things up front.
Right. No, that's excellent. Excellent points. Let's talk about these specifically, inside of the two sectors you focus on, which is office and industrial. Let's talk high level on office if we can. What's office doing in the Denver market right now? I hear a lot of negative press in the office space, but you found a way to focus on it. So I figured I'd ask why you're on the show.
Yeah. And I really focus on it because that's where, when I was appraising kind of all those years prior to becoming a broker, I used to cherry pick assignments toward the end of my appraisal career. And I was always gravitating towards office and industrial type assets. So I've done very large portfolios, up to $650 million portfolios, kind of down to the, little mom and pop office buildings and everything in between. So It really depends on the segment of office. I will say, the investment office market is a little challenged right now with companies really debating on the return to work, hybrid work models. A lot of tenants are nervous to commit to longer term leases. So there are headwinds in the office market at this point for investment properties. However, owner user properties are a different animal. Those groups who want to buy and occupy their own office buildings, they're a little bit more gung-ho to make those commitments for purchases. And there's not a lot of product available for sale in the market right now. So that's actually keeping pricing pretty propped up compared to investment properties, which have those headwinds because of tenants not willing to make longer term commitments like they had in the past. So, you've got different segments of the office market. It just really depends on the type of asset that you have, if it's more office user oriented versus investment oriented.
Yeah. And can you define the difference there for us?
Yeah. So an owner user building would be somebody, say I'm Joe Smith Mortgage Company and I want to own my own building because I have 25, mortgage officers in my company. So those owner users they're less motivated by what cap rates are, what rent rates are. They just want to own and occupy their own space. They want to control their operating expenses. They don't want to have, lease rates going up every year and just uncontrolled expenses. So by owning their own facility, they can better control that operating and overhead. Investment property is going to be something that's investor owned. So it'll be full of tenants or maybe one tenant, can be kind of a range. We have investors who are actually more different types of investors. You can have value add investors who are looking for partially leased buildings or maybe buildings that are older that require some capital. Those value add investors like to buy at pretty low prices and leave a little meat on the bone where they can re-tenant the building, put some capital into upgrades, maybe elevator lobbies, whatnot. Finish out some spaces for like turnkey spaces. And then, in the future, probably 3-5 years, look at selling that building for a nice premium on top of what they've put into it. Then you have your stabilized office investors who just basically want stabilized cash flow. They don't really want to put a lot of money into a building. They don't want to rehab or a fix and flip, if you will, like the value add investors will. Those guys tend to be a little bit longer term horizon owners and just are looking for stability and rent roll stability, stable tenants, just something that they can kind of maintain over the years.
Right. And so you're saying that the investors and I guess the investment side of office is facing some headwinds, but the owner occupants, it's really keeping prices still propped up. Keeping
them propped up. It's supply and demand. It comes down to it. I mean, limited supply on the market, high demand for groups that want to own their own real estate. It's just keeping it right. Propped up there.
Is there a certain size that is let's say a certain threshold in size that is seeming to hold true in, or is it across kind of all the office space, as a whole?
What I'm seeing in my market in particular is owner users probably under the 50,000 square foot mark. Anything a little larger than that, it's either corporate real estate, kind of a different class of real estate, more institutional, like just larger companies and corporations that might own that. An interesting segue on that is we're starting to see some sale leaseback activity. So corporations and entities that have owned their own real estate for a very long time are realizing they can unlock that capital of their real estate. They might stay there, or they will stay there. They're willing to commit to being tenants in their own building, but now they're willing to sell that building to an investor who will maintain them as a tenant, but they no longer need their equity tied up in that building. They can redeploy it in their business somehow, make a better return on it than they can just having it tied up in their real estate. And with cap rates where they are, investors are really hungry for stable assets. So it's a good time, especially if you've got a tenant that's committed to that building and you don't face those headwinds of trying to lease up a property. Right. You've got a tenant already in place there. So starting to see some sale leaseback activity.
I'm sure that would drive the cap rate down on that sale leaseback as well, for the seller. So
yep, exactly.
Right. That's tremendous, man. You've given us a lot of things to think about in the office space that we just don't hear quite such crystal clear insight on that market. I know you're specific there to Denver, but I think in general that's probably something that across the nation holds true. So that's absolutely fascinating. Give us a quick breakdown on the industrial sector. I know that's crazy, and there's lots of segments within industrial, but tell us what you focus on, and then kind of give us a snapshot on that market.
Yeah, so industrial, we're not seeing the headwinds that we are seeing in the office market. So industrial has been a segment of the market with very high demand, particularly with e-commerce, retail type users needing warehousing and storage space for their supply chain issues. Just industrial remains very robust, particular here in the Denver market. For a number of years, we've actually had marijuana has been legalized here. So a lot of our industrial product early on was the demand surged for marijuana grow operations that really took a good bite out of our supply. We've had quite a bit come back online, so we've got newer product available, but it's really driven up rental rates for industrial space. The smaller users, the plumbing companies, the smaller entities that have typically been users of industrial space, they've seen their rental rates more than double since marijuana has come into our market here and really just taken off a good chunk of our supply. So it's been an interesting dynamic here in our Denver market, really seeing just limited supply. We're seeing a lot of new development come online, and I think that's probably will become our headwind. Anytime you have an imbalance of supply and demand, you'll start to see some struggles with growing rent rates. And, although we've seen rent rates grow, I think if you're underwriting a new industrial deal here in the Denver market, you need to be cautious about the growth rates that you're projecting going forward. Just because we've seen it in the past doesn't mean that will hold true with all the new supply coming online. So just be cautious.
Yeah. And that's a common question in the multifamily sector as well is, okay, so we've seen rent growth, but can it continue? And of course, it's for very different reasons. But that's very interesting. What are you seeing people underwrite right now that you feel like is a safe rent growth assumption in industrial?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. And it depends on location within the market too. Sure. So we have segments of our market in Denver that are more robust than others. I would say there's a corridor between really the northern metro Denver area. So north of Denver, we're seeing a huge surge of new product coming online up in that market. So between Denver and Fort Collins, it's about an hour drive time difference between those two cities, larger employment centers, and a lot of new product coming online. I would be cautious of assuming rent growth of over 2 or 3% in that segment of the market. Same down south, moving down towards Colorado Springs, same challenge happening there. So new product coming online. And a lot of it, I would just be cautious. There's other pockets of the market where like land constrained markets like Boulder, for example, those are markets where it's very difficult to get new development done. So I think we can still continue to see stronger rent growth in the Boulder County market, the Northwest corridor, where with probably less inventory is coming online, but just being cautious overall on what you're underwriting.
Right. That's fantastic. Jaimee, I've really enjoyed this today. Thank you for taking the time to come on, give us a breakdown on industrial, on the office space, and really just how to prepare our listings for sale. That's something that you gave us a ton of actionable information there, and I certainly do appreciate it. Let's jump here into the final 4 questions, if you don't mind. What is one tool or resource you find you can't live without?
Man, I hate to say it, but CoStar. And if you're working with a competent broker, they'll probably have CoStar at their fingertips. So if you don't have it yourself as an investor, choose a broker who has access to it, because it's just market data, and you're going to need that to understand comparable sales, comparable rents, and your property within the market.
Right. Absolutely. If you could help our listeners avoid just one mistake in real estate, what would it be, and how would you avoid it?
One mistake in real estate?
Yes.
Investing. Being overly aggressive in your underwriting just to win the deal. So sometimes some of these property types are really, really competitive, and I'll see folks spread their assumptions, get a little bit aggressive on their assumptions, just like we talked about with rent growth.
Right.
And that can come, especially if you're syndicating a deal, if you have other investors coming in and you're forecasting these rent growth projections that maybe aren't feasible. I've seen that bite investors in the past.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. When it comes to investing in the world, what's one thing you're doing right now to make the world a better place?
Giving back, giving my time to others. So helping mentor other young women in commercial real estate and helping them get their careers off the ground. That's fantastic. Jaimee, if our listeners want to get in touch with you or learn more about you, what is the best way to do that? Probably email Jaimee@crebenchmark.com. My name is spelled Jaimee at crebenchmark.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, kind of the social media channels there. So it's pretty simple to Google me.
Absolutely. Jaimee, thank you for your time today. I do appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Sam.
Hey, thanks for listening to the How to Scale Commercial Real Estate podcast. If you can do me a favor and subscribe and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, whatever platform it is you use to listen, if you can do that for us, that would be a fantastic help to the show. It helps us both attract new listeners as well as rank higher on those directories. So appreciate you listening. Thanks so much and hope to catch you on the next episode.